Welcome back to our IELTS Grammar Masterclass course. Great to have you along today. We are going to spend this lesson looking at the past perfect and the past perfect continuous tenses. So there's two here that we're going to be examining, and then we will look at lots of examples as to how you can use these two in your IELTS exam. So this is great practice for you if you have one coming up, or if you're not sure about the tenses in English, this is a great start here as well. Okay, so let's begin by thinking about the past perfect first. You might have heard of this tense before. If you've seen other tense videos in this course, you might know what that perfect part of the tense might mean. So let's take a look together. Okay, firstly, what is it used for? What is the purpose of it? Well, it expresses an action that was completed before another action, all in the past. So it's almost like a way to establish a timeline or a clear sequence of events. You can think about what action happened first and then what came after it. The formation of it, we are wanting to use our auxiliary verb had, that's the past tense form, and we also want to include the past participle of the main verb. You might have come across the past participle before. If not, that's okay because we're going to briefly look at that today, so not to worry. Okay, so we want this combination, and a formula looks a little bit like this. So we can have our subject, our auxiliary verb had, and our past participle of the main verb. Okay, so past participle then in a bit more detail. What is this? Well, it's one of the, you can call it the principal parts of the verb. It's derived from the verb, and it's used to form various verb tenses, including these perfect tenses that we're talking about today. So, very important in tense formation. And to form it, we add an ed to regular verbs. Now that's really important because irregular verbs are slightly different, but if they are regular, you add this ed to the base form of the verb. So, in other words, before the verb has been changed or altered at all, we add that ed. So, regular verbs like walk becomes walked, play becomes played, jump becomes jumped. So it's fairly straightforward with regular verbs. You might get it confused with how we form the simple past. I walked, I played, I jumped. So the past tense of the verb is slightly different to the past participle. But not to worry too much, I know that they look the same, so as long as you're aware that in this tense it's actually the past participle and not so much the past tense, then that's the main thing here. Okay, irregular verbs then, you might have seen this coming. There's no specific rule for forming the past participle, so they need to be memorized with irregular verbs. The benefit is that they are quite common, more often than not, irregular verbs. You see them come up quite a lot, so the likelihood of you memorizing them is actually higher than we probably think. Is actually higher than, I would say, regular verbs, perhaps. Examples: go becomes gone, eat becomes eaten, sing becomes sung. So actually they're different to the past tense forms. They're their own past participle forms here. Okay, so hopefully that's shed some light on the past participle. Now back to our past perfect examples, affirmative examples. You could say something like, she had finished her homework before she went out to play. She being our subject, had is our auxiliary verb in that specific form, and finished is the past participle there. By the time they arrived, I had already eaten dinner. They didn't want to watch the movie because they had seen it already. Another sentence in which the tense isn't at the beginning, but you can still see nevertheless it's embedded within the sentence, and hopefully it's fairly straightforward to spot here with those three elements: subject, had, and then past participle. Okay, so negative, regular and irregular verbs. Well, to make a negative sentence in the past perfect, you add not after had. And it's exactly the same as the positive affirmative sentence, but of course that sentence doesn't have not in. So these negative sentences are fairly easy to remember. And it's important to note here that this is the same for irregular verbs as well. So you just add that not after the had, and you'll be able to make your negatives. For example, she had not finished her homework before she went out to play. They didn't want to watch the movie because they had not seen it. We were disappointed because we had not eaten the special cake. Okay, so a mixture of regular and irregular verbs here, all making that negative with that word not. So hopefully that makes sense with this one. Interrogatives, so our questions. In order to do this, you invert the subject and that auxiliary verb had again. You also place the auxiliary verb had at the beginning of the sentence to form this question this time. So let's have a look at this in action. Had she finished her homework before she went out to play? So you can see how before it's an affirmative, we've then made it a negative, and now it's an interrogative. Had they already seen the movie? Had they finished the project before the deadline? Okay, so for both regular and irregular verbs, this again is the rule. Lovely, so that was our past perfect. Now we're going to jump ahead to past perfect continuous, and we'll see whether they're similar in any way. Are they different? What's happening here? What does that continuous element mean? How does it change things? Maybe you have a clue and have an idea, but we'll see with plenty of examples as always now. So what is the past perfect continuous used for? Well, it indicates a continuous, or in other words, ongoing action that was happening up to a certain point in the past. So unlike past perfect, where it's more of a sequence of events in the past, this is focusing on the ongoing nature of one action before a certain point. So we're thinking about how long it had been going on for before another event occurred or happened. So what do we need? What parts of grammar do we need to form this tense? Well, we want our auxiliary verb had, like we had in past perfect, with been this time, the past participle of to be. So that's a new addition, our past participle of to be, been, and the present participle. So this is how it's a bit different as well, which is that verb plus that ing of the main verb. So maybe you've been with us when we've talked about the present participle. We'll just look at that again today. Okay, so quickly here's the formula. You have your subject, had, auxiliary verb, past participle, been, and then the present participle, which is that ing. So I know it looks a bit long and overwhelming, but I think with some examples it will be a lot clearer. So the present participle is a word that's just like the past participle, derived from a verb, and it can also be used as an adjective, but it's also primarily used to form the continuous verb tenses. And the important thing to remember here is that it's formed by adding the ing to the base form of the verb. So that's what we are doing with the present participle. Okay, so some examples then. Let's have a look. I was tired because I had been working all day. By the time she got home, he had been waiting for hours. They were exhausted because they had been studying for the exam since morning. Okay, so in all of these examples, hopefully you're getting the sense of this ongoing action. In the first one, this idea of working all day and then becoming tired. The second one, waiting for hours by the time she got home. So you can see this, it is a timeline. You're getting a sense of time, but also you're getting a sense of the duration here. And the last one, they had been studying for the exam since morning. So we know a start time for that one. Okay, negatives. So we want to use our word not after the auxiliary verb before the present participle, however. Okay, some examples here then. You could say, I was energized because I had not been working all day. By the time she got home, he had not been waiting for long. I was exhausted because I had not been sleeping well for several nights. So you can see how we've tweaked the examples a little bit, but you are hopefully getting a feel for creating these negatives here. And regular, irregular verbs, well, they're fairly straightforward because of this present participle, so you don't have to worry about doing anything different for, say, irregular verbs, because the ing will be added to the base form of the verb. So there's no special rule for irregular verbs here. So we don't have to worry about that, which is good. Okay then, interrogatives, what do we do? Well, we start the sentence with our auxiliary verb had, followed by the subject, then comes been, and then the present participle, which is our verb plus ing. Let's see this in action. So, had I been working all day when you called? How long had he been waiting when she finally arrived? How long had you been watching this program before I joined? So, of course, of course you don't have to start the sentence with had if you've got a phrase like how long. But as long as the had's before the subject, then that's the most important thing. Okay, let's finish today by thinking about an IELTS focus. So we're going to use these tenses and have some examples that might come up in an IELTS type situation, and you can see how you can utilize these. Okay, let's jump back to our past perfect speaking example. So you might be asked, can you talk about a memorable event from your past? And here's a sample answer. One particularly memorable event from my past was the trip to Paris that I took with my family. By the time we arrived, I had saved up for months to make it happen. The experience was incredible because I had never been to Europe before, and visiting iconic landmarks like the Eiffel Tower was a dream come true. Okay, so over to you. Can we spot any past perfect here? So what do we need to form the past perfect? Maybe an auxiliary verb, maybe a type of participle, either past or present. Can you remember? Let's have a look. Okay, a few examples here. I had saved. So we have our subject, our past tense form of the auxiliary verb had, and past participle of the verb saved. And another one, I had been. In this case, I had never been to Europe. So you can see it in this sample answer here, and that's something that you can use as a template for your IELTS practice. Okay, in the task 1 academic, then you could also use past perfect. For example, in 2010, the company had already expanded its market share by 15% before the economic downturn affected overall industry growth. You could also use it in the essay. One advantage of the traditional education system was that it had established a well-defined structure that had been proven effective for centuries. Okay, so have a think about any past perfect in these two examples. We know that we need our auxiliary verb had and the past participle now. Let's see. Okay, so the company had expanded. Okay, in task 2, it had established and had been, that had been, as well, referring to the well-defined structure. Okay, so it's come up a few. Okay, so hopefully you can see that the past perfect is really useful for all the various parts of the IELTS. Now let's switch gears to the past perfect continuous and go back to another speaking example here. So you might be asked, can you talk about a time when you were working on a challenging project? One project that stands out in my memory is when I was part of a team working on a research initiative at my university. It was an ambitious project that aimed to explore the long-term effects of climate change on local ecosystems. By the time we submitted our final report, we had been collecting data and conducting experiments for almost a year. Okay, can you remember what we need for our past perfect continuous? What different grammatical aspects do we need? What are we looking out for? What does our auxiliary verb look like? What about any participles of the main verb? Let's have a think. So we have a few examples here. The continuous effort we had been putting. So we, subject, our auxiliary verb had, then we need our past participle form of the verb to be, been, then our present participle form of the main verb with that ing. And then later on, another example, we had been collecting as well. Okay, let's think about task 1 academic. Over the 5-year period, the company had been steadily increasing its production efficiency, which contributed to the overall cost reduction. Task 2. The technological advancements in recent years had been continuously reshaping industries, leading to increased efficiency and innovation. Okay, any past perfect continuous here? What can you spot? Let's have a look. Had been increasing, and task 2, had been reshaping. Talking about the technological advancements here. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's lesson. We've thoroughly explored past perfect and past perfect continuous. So I hope this has been really helpful for you in your studies and your preparations. Thank you so much for coming along, and we'll see you next time.